This segment is brought to you by Cypress Stop, home of the happy customer.
Hey everybody, welcome into Bayou Time. Harry McCullough here. It's time to check in with the Lafourche Parish Sheriff's Office, and for that, we go to Captain Brennan Mathern, who's with the Lafourche Parish Sheriff's Office. So this is a kind of disturbing case, but an unusual case. You want to take us on what happened in Thibodaux recently?
Sure, Harry. We had an investigation last week where a mother and daughter were arrested because a fight that they were having resulted in an infant's fractured skull. So here you see 39-year-old Dashika McDowell and her daughter, 22-year-old Jada McDowell. They were both arrested after this domestic incident that occurred on Carla Drive in Thibodaux. As we learned through the investigation, our deputies were called out to the residents. Apparently, they started arguing, and that argument became physical, and they started striking each other. And at one point, they started using objects around the house to strike each other, including, for example, a remote control for a TV. And at one point, Jada McDowell, who is the mother, she was the daughter here who was fighting with her mother, but she also has a child, an infant child. And at one point, she picked up that infant daughter, but continued fighting with her mother. And during the altercation, the infant did suffer a skull fracture. Ultimately, the infant was transported to a local hospital and then taken to Children's Hospital. And after detectives and deputies looked at this, they decided to get warrants for both women. So both Dashika McDowell and Jada McDowell, both arrested for 1 count each of domestic abuse battery with child endangerment and second-degree cruelty to juveniles, and they were arrested last week.
So this is, I guess, a little different when you have two people that are arrested in a situation like that. Could they not come to a conclusion on what happened to the child, or why was both arrested in this case?
Right. Well, kind of everything you just pointed out. It was kind of a combination of that. So in any domestic violence investigation, we actually championed the legislation many years ago to help law enforcement officers investigate domestic violence, where you have to determine the predominant aggressor. When that means that just because someone hit first, that doesn't mean that they were ultimately the predominant aggressor in the situation. They could have hit first out of what they, view to be self-defense. And this is a little more unusual because it involves a mother and a daughter. Typically, domestic violence would involve a husband and a wife, or at least two spouses. But a lot of times you do see a man arrested for domestic violence after striking his wife. In this case, you have a mother and daughter who were fighting. And ultimately, Jada picking up the infant put the child in harm's way, but Dashika McDowell continuing to fight also put the child in harm's way. So ultimately, to your point, they could not fully determine what ultimately led to the child's injury, except for the fact that these two continued fighting with the child present. So that's what led to the charges for both individuals in this particular case.
That's interesting. So how does an officer train for something like that to figure out who's the dominant or aggressor or the dominant role in a case, no matter who started? I guess that's something that your officers must train for.
Absolutely. Domestic violence training, in the academy, we have, however many hours we have of learning and several months of learning. Domestic violence investigation itself is more than a week of classroom experience by itself, not to mention later going into scenarios and trying to do it. So that's how much investigation time comes on domestic violence. And it's one of the most unpredictable and dangerous calls that an officer can go on, because you're usually visiting someone's home. You have no idea if there are weapons for the most part. So this is, it's one of the most intriguing and interesting investigations that an officer will conduct. And you're right, a lot of training into how to spot signs, especially when dealing with spouses and why one spouse might be protecting the other, or may not want to get, even if they called us, they may not want the spouse arrested. So there's a lot that goes into it, and regardless of that fact, we're able to come up with and investigate a domestic violence incident and ultimately determine who should be arrested in each case that we get called to.
Yeah, you see a lot of those situations, and look, my experience is, maybe to beat on TV or watching cops on TV as well. But a lot of times, what you're seeing now is mental breakdowns where you'll have somebody call on, like a son or whatever who's having a mental episode, I guess, and that's another really dangerous situation because they're calling because they need help, but they're also don't want you to hurt, so that's a real thing. And so we've got a minute left, but that's another real involved thing with domestic violence, I would imagine.
That's a whole other week of training, Harry, dealing with critical incidents like that. And mental health issues and things like that. That's a whole separate training that we do offer at the academy, but also all of our officers, because it's fairly new that we've been training in law enforcement for it. So it's something that all of our existing officers have had to go through, even the ones that have gone through the academy long ago. But you're right. All of that is things that our officers have to deal with. It's not just, pulling people over and giving tickets and making arrests. Sometimes you're dealing with some very complicated issues.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate part of and the riskier part of what you guys do. So we appreciate it. Well, thanks for the update, Brennan. Thanks, and we appreciate hearing you from Lafourche Parish.
Thank you, Harry.
All right, we'll be right back for more Bayou Time right after this.
This segment was brought to you by Cypress Stop, home of the happy customer.